for decades, our culture has insisted on something approximating a position of moral relativism. There's no way of drawing hierarchical distinctions between the value claims that different cultures present. We can't admit for a moment that there might be some reason to be leery, let's say, of an immigrant class that would be associated with the kind of education that the madrasas are producing for all sorts of ideological reasons. We can't make any allowance for the idea that some immigrants might be more difficult to integrate into our culture than others. And that is a thorny problem. Don't get me wrong. But now, so we open the floodgates, let's say, and we find out that there are people who don't have democracies in their own country because they don't have the culture for it, let's say, or the desire for it. And they bring those attitudes along with them. Surprise, surprise, because they weren't just freedom-loving, oppressed people striving to be free who are now thrilled to death to be in a democratic country, but people who are pretty damn prone to bring all of the problems that they had in their own country along with them. Now, and we're not supposed to say that. Now, my sense is the working class doesn't get to have their say, because if they had their say, everyone who's modern and liberal and tolerant in that pathological manner that accepts everything without distinction would have to do some serious digging into the understructure of their own belief systems and think, oh, well, and then that touches on something else. Now, so here's a weird segue, what would you say, an idea that popped into my head, an association. Richard Dawkins announced himself as a cultural Christian. So then one of the things that makes me ask is something like, well, what is it that the West has right, that the enemies of the West have wrong, that's percolating at the bottom of all of this mess, that's driving what? That's driving the relativistic arguments of the pro-immigration types, but that's also fulminating this terrible clash of cultures that we unsurprisingly see emerging on our streets. It's like, so the question first is like, what the hell's driving the massive immigration into the West? Because we see it in Canada, maybe worse than anywhere else at the moment, or at a more rapid rate than anywhere else. Canada is so damn peaceful, it's hard to destabilize it, but we're working hard on that. So what's driving this? Is it the insistence? Is it this ideological insistence?
It's a lot of things. One is, as I've warned about for a long time, one is something that isn't inevitable, but is hard to resist, which is the simple ease of movement in the 21st century, the relative cheapness of travel compared to any previous century, and the knowledge through the devices we have in our pockets around the globe. I mean, 3 billion people are on WhatsApp alone. The ability of people anywhere in the world to discover the life of anyone else in the world easily. And add to that the fact that most countries in the world are not even remotely approximating either the safety or the wealth available in 21st century Canada, for instance, or Britain. And it's inevitable that a lot of people will want that. Now, as I've said for years, just because they may want it does not mean that Western liberal democracies can remotely be the place where everybody who wants a better life can or should go. It's simply impossible. And you just crunch the numbers on people in sub-Saharan Africa who want to move into Europe, for instance. And if that happened, if the third of sub-Saharan Africa who want to move moved, Europe would totally unrecognizable. Now, the second thing that comes from that is that it is extremely difficult for politicians to maintain their borders. And I think this is highly regrettable, because I think the only way in which, among other things, you can have an actual asylum system where you actually take in those unusual cases where asylum should be needed, just disappear once you have illegal migration every day coming in on boats, or as in the case of America, millions of people walking across the southern border in the last 4 years. And add to that the fact that, as was famously said in 1968 by somebody, it's the easiest thing to put off any difficult decision you have to make today and leave it for your successors to address. all the time making it harder for your successors. But I said this to a European politician some years ago when they said that they were going to deport the 1 million illegals that were in their country. I said, how are you going to do it? Because you and I know that on day one, if you rounded up everyone who is legally in the country and put them on buses, trains, boats, the first woman or child crying would be on the front page of every newspaper the next morning. And by day two, you would have to stop because of public pressure. That's just, it seems to be a reality for the time being. By the way, until such a time emerges, and it could, where the society says we don't give a damn anymore, we don't give a damn, that may well happen. But until that does happen, countries are absolutely incapable, politicians are incapable of answering this question. Then you have a follow-on one, which addresses what you mentioned about Richard Dawkins, among other things, which is America. It's not quite true to say that America was a society based on an idea, but it's a nice idea. America was based on an idea, but the idea came about because of the people who founded the Republic, the United States of America. And if they hadn't...
Englishmen.
Right. If they had have been from somewhere else, even a different denomination, the United States would be very different. However, as far as states founded on an idea goes, America is probably the nearest to that. European nations, Britain, are not based on an idea. They were not based on an idea. Now, that isn't to say that they don't have very distinct cultures. And my word, the different cultures across Europe are so different that everyone jokes about their neighbors and regards their neighbor in the neighboring European country as being wildly different from them. To an outsider, it seems preposterous that the Swedes and the Norwegians would have distinctions between them, but they do. But I say this to say that Europe and Britain was made up of ethnic identities. And those ethnic identities had ideas, of course. But even in Britain, you have the Welsh, you have the Scots, you have the English, the Northern Irish, the Irish. How do you integrate into that? How do you do it? Does anyone know? And the answer is no. Have some people? I'd say yes. Have a majority? It doesn't look that way to me. And so this is just a bomb underneath the societies in Europe in particular. It has been about ethnicity. We don't like things about being about ethnicity. So we say it's about an idea. But all my adult life, this idea has been so hard for anyone to pin down that they've just failed at it time and time again. I'm old enough to remember when Gordon Brown was Prime Minister, and I contributed to a book that he edited about being British, what Britishness was. That was 20 years ago. And Britain is no closer to defining that today than it was 20 years ago.